Hello, this is Bryce on the floor coming at you with another tennis improvement video. Today we're going to do a stroke analysis of my serve. I'm going to look at my own serve and compare it to the pros and look at how I can improve my serve and maybe even some of the good things about my serve to give you guys some insights about how you can improve your own serve. Let's get into it. Here's me serving and then we're going to break it down on a stroke analysis.
Felix has an excellent serve, and I think this is going to be a very fun analysis. So let's look at what initially Felix is doing. All right, so he's going to start his toss, and then I want you to pay special attention to the pivot foot. When you move into a pinpoint stance, you want to make sure you do a pivot foot because that's going to allow you to make sure your body is fully coiled, because if you don't do a pivot foot like Félix Auger-Aliassime, then you're going to have rotation problems when you move into the pinpoint stance. Okay, so the first thing that I want you to pay attention to in Felix's serve is that pivot foot. So once he moves with that pivot foot, he moves into the pinpoint stance, and notice how his body is very coiled. All right, his legs are facing the back fence, okay, and also there's a lot of coil in his weight, and his body is also facing the back fence. All that is going to give him an insane amount of power when he moves into the serve. That's one thing to keep in mind, is you want to make sure that your body is completely coiled in, and the more you can coil, the more power that you're going to be able to generate. So the next thing that happens in Félix Auger-Aliassime's serve is he goes right to left. This motion here, this is the right to left movement. And I want you to imagine there's basically a birthday hat, and one way to imagine the first movement in your serve motion is the birthday hat, and you want to imagine you're hitting off the birthday hat. And notice how Felix is kind of moving the racket just over his head with that initial movement. And this is called the right to left movement. So you want to initially take the racket right to left like this, and then the racket is naturally going to fall into the racket drop position. And the racket drop position is here. And he has a flawless racket drop position at that position here. And then notice here, it's a little bit fuzzy, but notice how the racket is on edge, okay? So he's not opening the racket. The racket is almost closed as he moves through contacting the ball. And when he contacts the ball, notice where the racket is facing. The racket is in his arm is moving out and not hitting towards the target, and that's an indicator of pronation. And all in all, that's an excellent serve. And let's take a look at my serve. Initially, one thing that I need to improve on my serve is this pivot foot, okay? So I also have a pinpoint stance like Félix Auger-Aliassime. However, my pivot foot is a little bit off, okay? So notice here, I do the pivot foot, but I revert right back, and that's preventing me from fully coiling my body. So notice how my legs are moving this way, and my body is facing that way. So my body is facing properly towards the back fence. However, my legs are facing into the court, and that's leading to a problem. And that's all because I'm having a little bit of trouble with that pivot foot. First thing that I can learn from Félix Auger-Aliassime is to work on that pivot foot right there. You want to pivot almost so that you're foot faulting with your front leg. That's one thing that I can work on, is that pivot foot, so I can get a full coil, and that's going to be able to drastically increase my power. So the next thing is that, with Felix's serve, he's coiling a lot more than me. So there is a lot of coil. However, there's a lot more kinetic energy being built up in Felix's serve. Notice the dramatic turn and coil that Felix is doing. So that's one thing that I could work on, is making sure that I'm coiling more and getting even more kinetic energy. All right, so there is a little bit of coil in my serve because my body is facing the back fence, but I could even take it to another level by getting the legs in the proper position and coiling the body even more. Now let's look into the arm movement. With my toss, my arm is pretty much erect, and then I release the ball right at about eye level. And then also at this position, I am going right to left. So the racket's moving right to left properly right there. And there's a slight pause, and that's one thing that we could work on, is you want to have a continuous motion and you want to avoid pauses. Now there's not a very extreme pause, which is one thing that I've worked on a lot. However, we want to make sure it's a continuous motion and avoid pauses. So that might be something I could work on even a little bit more, but one positive is I am going right to left, and I'm also leading with the elbow as I move into the racket drop. So at this position, moving into the racket drop properly, and notice how the elbow is moving up. So I'm leading with the elbow. Okay, this is an indicator of a good racket drop position. And also, I want you to notice how I'm leading with the racket on edge. Notice how the racket isn't open. The racket is on edge all the way up until just before I hit the ball. So you want to make sure your racket's closed all the way up until you hit the ball, and that's how you can efficiently move your racket through the air so you can generate a lot of power. And notice also how I'm hitting away from the target. Here is a great indicator of pronation, and I'm pronating just like we see on Felix's serve. All right, so this position here is similar with me and Felix as I'm hitting away from the target. But I could do a better job of also lifting from the air a little bit more, and that could also drastically increase the power. So notice with Felix, he's really far into the air, and that all started with this great coil. And that's one thing that I could do to really take that serve to the next level, is coil even more, get that pivot foot correct, and be able to get more kinetic energy, getting more into the air, and getting even more power into my serve. All right, so here was the good, and here was the bad with my serve. This has been Bryce on the floor with another tennis improvement video. Like, comment, subscribe. If you got value from this video, click the link below, enroll in my serve course, and learn how to hit incredible serves. And as always, great luck out there on the tennis court. Thanks.